I am very much looking forward to introducing everyone. And it is our second virtual meetup that we're having. And I have the ultimate pleasure of announcing to you Marc Lelijveld from the Netherlands. Marc was going to do this meetup for us in a physical presentation, but we figured that it would be fun as well to do it in a virtual presentation. So Marc, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yep, thanks, Benny. So good evening, everyone. My name is Marc. I'm from the Netherlands, data platform MVP, working as a data and AI consultant at Macaw in the Netherlands. So yeah, I was actually looking forward to doing this presentation in person as well, but yeah, the current situation doesn't allow us to do so. So I'm happy to be here virtually today.
Yep, thanks. We'll also have Nicky van Vroenhoven present for us. Nicky was supposed to be doing the first session of the day, but he'll be doing the second session as he had to take care of some things at home. But there are a bunch of things coming up for Data Minds as well, so I quickly want to go through those later on as well. And then after that, I've got a few sneaky questions in store for Marc.
Ooh, so looking forward to it.
So Marc, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So can I already start sharing a screen, Benny?
Sure. If yep, then just share the screen and then it'll pop up in the window.
Yep. Okay. So it should be there in a second.
Yep.
There we go. Okay. So thanks, Benny, for having me first. I really like to be able to present virtually today for the Data Minds user group. My session will be about usage of parameter to add extra flexibility to your Power BI content. But for those of you who missed it in the beginning, let me again shortly introduce myself and tell a little bit more about my background. My name is Marc. I'm working as a data and AI consultant at Macaw in the Netherlands. I'm also happy to be awarded as a data platform MVP. And next to that, Power BI is one of my biggest passions. And next to that, of course, beer. Even though I'm not Belgian, I'm really loving beer. So I'm brewing my own beer every now and then. And I thought, yeah, okay, Power BI, beer, how to combine those two passions together. So I set up something called Power Beer, of course. So as you can see, t-shirts, mugs, whatever, you can find all that on my website as well. You can buy some Power Beer swag there, and all profit goes to charity. I don't earn any money for it, so let's put that up front. Of course, feel free to reach out to me to any social channels or drop me an email or whatever you want. The session will be live, available as a recording later on, and of course, all content is available on my website as well. Last but not least, I'm also one of the co-organizers of Power BI Days in the Netherlands. So we also organize meetups every now and then. Have a look at powerbidays.com and we will share and announce our new meetups there as well. But this is Data Minds, so let's just continue on with my session. What I will talk about in today's session is applying parameters in your GTAP pipeline. Second, I will look into the optimize your report building by the usage of parameters. Building your own data mansion, which is way better than the default one in Power BI, as a little spoiler. Parameters in the Power BI service, creating templates, and Whatif parameters. All that will be done with the usage of a lot of demos, so I hope the demo gods are with me today. I've tested everything before the session, everything was still working, so let's see how things are going. So the first one, applying parameters in your GTAP pipeline. First, a little bit more about what actually is our GTAP pipeline. As we're used to do in a lot of development work is having different environments where we move from environment to environment before we push our content live, which can be development, test, acceptance, production. Maybe you even have a training one, or maybe you only have test acceptance or development acceptance and production, all depending on your own environment. But let's assume that we have development, test, acceptance, and production. All this is for a stable environment where you can develop your new content, test your new content before you put it live in production. And the way how we do that in Power BI today is a little bit differently than we probably used to do in a lot of other software development. Simply, if you push something live to the Power BI service, it may happen that you already overwrite your data set in your report, which directly affects the end user reporting. So Actually, what we set up as our best practice within Macaw and what I'm applying at my customers as well is the usage of 2 different data sets and different environments for setting this up and having a decent development and testing environment before we move into production. You can do that in a way as I display here on the screen by having a different PBIX file, but also you can split the workspaces if you really want. It's all depending on your personal preferences. The big advantage of this is that you can also have a version for your key user to provide you feedback directly on the content you created, do some proper testing before you move it over. But yeah, if you finish this testing and you're ready to go live, how do you easily switch all this to your production environment? And this is where the functionality of parameters comes in. Because you simply want to have an easy switch and not really apply all these changes over and over again. So you worked for maybe a month, maybe shorter, on the new version of your data model file and your report, and then you want to publish it live. But let's first have a quick talk about what parameters actually are. It's something that we can easily change from either a Power BI desktop perspective or a Power BI service perspective, which makes it easier for us to switch a specific parameter or a specific value in your logic to another environment. For example, your connection string. So parameters exist in Power BI desktop and the Power BI service. In Power BI desktop, we will find it in the query editor window. I will show you that in a second. And in Power BI service, you can find it in your dataset settings. Both of them, I will show them during the demos coming up. So to give you a little context about what we're using, all the demos today, I will use the same demo context where I created 3 environments in Azure, all containing a SQL database server, SQL database, and an analysis service model. And what we're going to do is actually create content on top of the development environment, and then we're going to move this over to the acceptance environment, and when we're done, to the production environment. But how can we do this in the most effective and easy way? And definitely parameters is one of the key features that we need here. So let's first have a look at how we can easily change the data source connection string. So I will drop the slides for a second and I will move over to Power BI desktop. And as you can see, I have tons of demos prepared, so let's hope all of them are still going to work. And connection string is, I think, this one. So I built a really ugly report, and actually this data set is all about fuel transactions with company cars. And one thing up front, it's all fake data, or it's my own data, so I'm happy to share it on the screen as well. But let's say that we have different environments, and as I told you, we have different databases as well. And then I'm pretty sure that this should be the one, yes. And we really build a really simple data model. Even the tables are not all connected together, and it doesn't really matter, to be honest. But let's jump into the transform data or the query editor, and let's show you what we did. On the left side here, we see all the items that we had. But the first thing I did before I even imported this data is creating 2 parameters, which is my connection string and even my database name in this case. So what I can do when I connect to one of the new sources, and in this case, this can be my Azure SQL database, there is an option to select a parameter instead of the usual insert text field for your data source. So when I connect to an Azure SQL database, there's a little drop down here in the middle, which can be ABC, which is just text, or I select a parameter. And in here, I can connect to an existing parameter. What is already created. So I already created one. I will show you in a second how you can do that separately. And here's my connection string, and I can select another one for my database as well, which is the database name. By simply clicking OK, it will now leverage the values that were inserted as the parameters. And I can directly connect to this database. I already loaded the data, so I'm not going to bother you with all this. But how do you set up these parameters? In the top ribbon of the Power Query editor, we have the Manage Parameters section. And in here, you can create new parameters. which can be anything. One important thing to be aware of, always set the appropriate type for your parameter. Simply because if this is not set correctly, you may have issues with adding the parameters in the Power BI service, what we'll show you later. Another thing to be aware of is make use of this description field. In this case, I even repeated the same values as I've done in the list of values that you can select from the dropdown. This is another little trick that you should take care of, because the drop-down list will not show up in the Power BI service. So it will only show you the current value for the parameter. So it is really useful to enter the description and all the possible values that you can add there. So you know in the Power BI service, when you're changing these parameter values, what can be the possible values to enter here. Building these parameters is fairly easy. Just clicking new and you will generate a new one. Give it an appropriate name, description, and set the correct type, what you want it to be. Having said that, as you can see now, I created a little naming convention for my values. So in here we have the A, which is my acceptance environment, and the same for the connection string, which is also demo ADP. As I'm going to show you here in the table view transactions, I only have 3 rows. So 3 rows is a limited data set. I can do maybe some testing work with it. And this is a test setup, so 3 rows should be sufficient. What I can easily do is just switching over to one of the other values. So let's move to the P, demo PDP, and do the same for my database name. With this, I can easily switch everything. And as soon as the Power Query editor starts reloading everything, you will see that I have way more data in my production database. This is really useful in Power BI Desktop to easily switch between environments and make it much more user-friendly instead of re-entering this connection string every time again. So that is a really easy one and a really simple one to work with. So that about changing the data source connection string. Another option that you can use is switching the folders if you're using maybe Excel files in a SharePoint site saved. This is one of the use cases I still see happening a lot, because unfortunately we're not all using an LS services or any other database system or models, appropriate data model. So yeah, maybe you've stored a lot of Excel files somewhere on a SharePoint site. In this case, it can be really useful to switch the folders dynamically, because we probably all know as soon as we start doing this, it may happen that maybe your loading of your data in Power BI Desktop is a little bit slower than you want it to be. So let's change the folder dynamically. So in here we have the same data set, but then stored in separate Excel files. So I'm going to quickly show you what my SharePoint site looks like. It's a really boring SharePoint site, but what I did here is creating 2 folders. We have a dev folder and a production folder. The only difference here is that my dev folder only contains 1 file, which is up to 500 transactions or whatever it is, but it only contains 1 CSV file. And my production folder contains way more, in this case 5 CSV files. Imagine that I need to load all these 5 CSV files, or maybe even hundreds or dozens of CSV files. This can be really slow. So loading all this in Power BI Desktop can really take some time, and you don't want to wait for that. So an easy way to do something similar here is to first create a connection to the SharePoint folder. That's what I did here. And normally when you connect to a SharePoint folder from the query editor, you will see all files listed that are available in this whole SharePoint site, in all the different folders, wherever it is. Something what I did here is creating another parameter, which is my environment switch. At least that's what I named it. This environment switch is actually something that I use the same setup. So I gave it the type text, and it is or/dev/ or /prod/. The current value is dev, so that's fine for now. And what I can do here is simply filter the folder path column. So let's get rid of this step for a second. And what we can do here, the last column when we connect to a SharePoint folder is the folder path. And what we can do here is easily apply a text filter. And when we do so, I'm going to say here that it contains a specific part of it. I'm not going to insert the full connection string in the parameter value for one reason, and that is mainly I don't want to retype this whole value over and over again. So I'm using contains instead of equals. In here we have something similar like we earlier had with connecting to the database, and we can select a parameter here as well instead of manually hard coding the text. Let's just click OK. And what we will see is that I only have one file left and one row left, so only one file, which is dedicated to this to the folder /dev/. Looking at the data we have, and let's have a quick look at the left bottom. We have 500 rows now with 10 columns. Something that can be easily done now is switching this parameter to the production one. And what you'll see in the SharePoint folder, now we have 5 files instead of 1. And looking at the data, we have over 1,000 rows. So this will probably take much longer to load. So what I always prefer to do myself is to improve my report building, make everything a little faster in the developing. I set it by default to development when I'm working in Power BI Desktop. I click close and apply, and I'll only load a separate set of data. Let's have a quick look on what's happening here. We have 2,500 transactions at this moment, and once this is done, it will only show me the first 500. And these first 500 are only based on the first file of data. In Power BI Desktop, without opening the query editor, we can also go here and click on the little drop down, go to edit parameters, and in here we can also switch the parameter to production. Now this is only 5 CSV files, so it is still pretty fast. But imagine that you have maybe over 100 or maybe even over 1,000 CSV files. When I click apply now, it will start loading all these 2,500 rows again. This is pretty fast, but this is only a small data set. As a second option to use parameters in Power BI Desktop. This will really help you in optimizing your report building as well, because probably you're loading a lot of data all the time. We have all seen this screen many times. If you're working with Power BI Desktop, it starts loading, and maybe you end up with something like this, a random error where you're stuck. Or even if you're unlucky, your laptop starts to reboot or starts updating. So I'm not gonna steal all the content from Nikki, but query folding is something also we should really take into account. Query folding is actually the way how you can easily push down SQL queries back to the native source, what in my case is a SQL database, and Power BI will generate your SQL queries. This will really improve your Power Query performance, and it works with a lot of different data sources. Please note that the data source should support T-SQL statements, but also SharePoint lists are possible when you use the OAuth data connection. Supported data operations, I think Nikki will tell you more about that, but something like joining, filtering, numeric calculations, a lot of things are possible. And this will all be pushed back to the data source. So let me show you how using a top N filter in Power BI dynamically based on a parameter can really help you in improving your data or your report building. So let's go to the third demo. In here, I've used the same data set. The look and feel is a little bit different, but yeah, it's not about the report this time. So let's have a quick look again at the query editor. We have the same 4 tables about a car, about some database metadata, the types of fuel, and fuel transactions. Currently, we're connected to the production environment. As I said before, using parameters can be really useful to switch your connection string when you're connecting to different source systems. But it's not always the case. Maybe you only have a production system. And if you only have a production system, it can happen that you directly connect to your production database and you're loading thousands or maybe millions of rows. then you're stuck with the same challenge again, where you really want to only load a limited set of data in Power BI Desktop, which helps you to keep your PBIX file really small. And besides that, it will also help you to load it faster, do some debugging faster, and only load in the Power BI service the full data set. So what we're going to do here, and let me first get rid of them. So I'm going to show you how you can do this. I use 2 parameters here, and we're going to recreate them for now. So I'm just deleting them. Let's set up 2 new parameters. I'm going to click New Parameter. These 2 existing ones were already there, connection string and the database name like I've showed you before. But we're going to add a new one, which is in development. And this is not the type text, but this is the type binary, or sorry, the type true or false. So it has either the value true or false. In this case, I just enter true, and we just click OK. That's the first thing we're going to use. Please know that filters like this are only useful on your fact tables. Your dimensional tables, in most of the cases, just need to load the full data. In my case, they are really small, only 8 rows, and the cars tables only 25 rows. So that's still doable. But a fuel transaction currently has these total 2,500 rows, and we're going to want to limit this down. So what we're going to do is use this step in what you see on top, keep rows, and we're going to keep the top rows. But before I do that, I'm quickly going to show you that query folding is still happening here. Query folding is something you can see here once it shows the view native query. More about that later in Nikki's session. But you can see that this is the T-SQL statement that is generated. Now I'm just going to apply keep top rows, and I'm just going to enter in the dialog box, I want to keep only the first 5 rows, which is a really limited set. And now I only have 5 rows left. This can already be very useful because I really limited down my set of data that I want to load. And let's have a quick look. Query folding is still happening, but it adjusted the T-SQL statement to select the top 5. So this can be done, but we're not using the parameter yet. So the last step we added here is kept the first rows, and now we want to adjust this. Personally, I always prefer to do this in the advanced editor because we're going to apply a little bit more logic here. This is actually the Power Query code we generated. So what we're going to do is write an if statement and then check the parameter value. If this equals true, apply the top n rows. If not, then just return the result of the previous step. As Power Query runs line by line, the first step is source and then a connection string. The second step is database with the input from the step before, source. And another one here, what you see happening is inserting the database, the result of the step before. And here we see the same. DBO full transactions is the name of the step before. So we want to use the if statement. If we just type if and then we call the parameter value, and parameter values are called in between round brackets. Let's have a quick look. The name is in development. And I can easily select and click it here. If in development equals true, and please know that Power Query is case sensitive, so we need to type it lowercase here. So if the parameter value for in development equals true, then apply the table first rows with the top 5 rows. Else, if that is not equal to true, we want to return this the full data set, which is the result of the step before, DBO fuel transactions. So let's just paste that here. So let's just click done and see if this is working. We just adjusted this step here on top. As you can see, it looks similar. Query folding is still happening, but let's see if this is working once we change this parameter to false now. So let's change this to false. And as you can see, we now have the full list of with all the fuel transactions in the same query. And one more time doing the right click, we still have the query folding applied and the T-SQL statement is adjusted. What Power Query is actually doing is more or less skipping this table first n rows once it doesn't match this condition. So that's all we're doing, and this really helps you in quickly building and faster building in Power BI Desktop in the query editor. So let's move back to the slides. Building a data dimension. Data dimensions are created by default in Power BI. What Power BI is actually doing is generating data dimensions based on every table or every column in your data set that uses some sort of date or time. But actually, this is a really limited set of your data dimensions. It only contains year, quarter, month, and day. So why should you build your own data dimension? It can be really useful when you want to reuse the same data dimension across multiple columns in your data set. It really limits down the size of your data model, because Power BI by default creates a separate data dimension for every column. So this will blow up your data model. It's one of the best practices to disable it by default. And also to add additional information like which day of the week is this? Was this a public holiday, yes or no? So all that can be done by creating your own data dimension. The default data dimension looks like this. And sorry that the screenshot is in Dutch, but this is actually year, quarter, month, and day. This is generated by default by Power BI if you do not disable it. I will show you in a second where you can do that. This will really blow up your data model. Now I only have one column that contains a date, but imagine that you have a sales table with a shipment date, an order date, whatever kind of date you can imagine. This will really blow it up. So let's move back to Power BI Desktop again and see where it is. Not this one. The dimension. Same report, same look and feel. But first, let's have a quick look on how you can disable your data dimension by default. Once you go to File, Options and Settings, and again Options, you'll see the Power BI Desktop settings, and in here we have a few options. First one is on top in Data Load, Auto Date Time for new files. Please disable this directly, because this will prevent you from creating the auto date time tables in new Power BI files. Another thing to check when you receive a file from your colleague, for example, is go to the current file and have a quick look here, because here we see that it's still enabled. So how can you check what is happening on the back? With additional tooling, like for example, Dex Studio. Forgot to start it up, so give me a little second and I will open Dex Studio. Once I open Dex Studio, I can connect to my Power BI file that is open right now. And I can quickly connect to the, which one was it? No, it doesn't really matter, I think, to be honest. Data dimension. Well, I'll just pick one. And let's connect to it. And what we'll see on the left side is all the tables that are available for us, and all the tables that are part of our data model. And as you can see here is also the default generated data dimension. So here you can directly see what is generated by Power BI. That is one of the things we want to prevent from happening. So we can prevent this from happening by disabling this little toggle box here, auto date time. So let's disable it, and Power BI will delete them right now. Once we've done that, we have an issue with our time-based calculations and time intelligence calculations, because we don't have a data dimension anymore. So we want to create our own. I already did one, as you can see here, but let's recreate this one as well. And again, the usage of parameters. So let's start with creating two parameters, and these two parameters are actually I'm just deleting everything for a second. Is the first two parameters we're going to create is the first year and the last year we want to our data dimension for. So let's start with start year and give it an appropriate description. And in this case, it's only a year, so it is actually a number. Whole number doesn't exist, so it is a decimal number in this case. And let's say we start in 2015. We want another parameter for the end year as well. And end year for the data dimension. And this is also this decimal number, and we start in 2020, so the end of this year. That's fine for now. Once these two are created, let's just move them quickly in the folder. We want to create a new query that's going to generate our data dimension. And in here, we start with something like give me back the first, or return me the first date of the start year. So I'm going to type this by heart now. Which is date. And then we're going to leverage the just created parameter. Start here, and in this case, sensitive. We want to start on the 1st of January. This will return us the 1st of January 2015. So let's do the same for the end year. And we're going to insert a new step. By the way, a little trick. I didn't know this for a long time. When you click this button, it will generate a new step as well. And we want to have the end year and also return the date. And we want to end, of course, on the 31st of December. And another little trick now, or another thing we want to do now is calculate the days in between. So here we're going to say what's the number of days, and that is duration.days, this one indeed. Date, and I forgot to do one thing, because this one will fill now. No, start date. And that is renaming my steps here. Since it also always inserts source as default, I'm going to do this in the advanced editor again and rename this to start date and rename this one to end date. And this will be our duration. And return duration. And there we go. In total, there are a little bit over 2,000 days in between these 2 dates. As last step, we want to generate a full table with all the dates in between. So what we're going to do now is going to use the list.dates, and we start with the start date. Of course, you don't have to remember this all by heart. All these type of examples are available online. And we want to add up the duration, so a little bit over 2,000 number, and we want to do that in days. So we need to set another thing, which is the duration in days. Close the last bracket. And probably I misspelled something. List.dates. Yes. There we go. As last trick, I'm going to show you how you can easily do your own data dimension. It generates a list, and now I just said convert it to a table, rename it for a second to date. And as last trick, I really prefer to use the option column from examples. When I select this and I say from selection, what I can do quickly, and Power BI is in this case really smart, by just double clicking this one, and I want to generate based on this column, I can tell this, for example, like give me back the day of the week based on this one. I click next to it and I directly recognize the name, click OK, and it will add all these columns I want. So let's do another one from selection. And do a double click, and then for example, say give me the, what shall we do? The month name instead of the month number. And there we go again. This will really help you to really quickly build your own data dimension. Once you've done this one time, you will probably just copy paste everything over and over again to all your other data models, or start leveraging templates, what I'll show you in a second. By using these parameters for building your data dimension, you can easily change the size of your data dimension from Power BI Service and Power BI Desktop. again, this can be really useful when you have a limited data set in Power BI desktop and you want to create a bigger data set in Power BI service. Or maybe if we want to start changing the size of our data dimension as of next year, because now it is ending in the end of 2020. So maybe you want to expand it to 2025. This will automatically be leveraged. So let's have a quick look at the step end date, because now my last date is the 31st of December in 2025. So this will automatically, all the parameter values will be leveraged inside the generation of the data dimension. So again, let's move back to the slides. So then about building your data dimension. I already did the demo. So let's just quickly show you how you can also change these parameter values in the Power BI service. Let's go to the Power BI service. I already published a file right before the presentation to one of my demo workspaces, and here I have a data set and a Power BI file. When I go to the data set settings, I can do that here, or I can do it on the gear setting on the right top. Go to settings, data sets, and in here we have it. This is my demo file for now. In here, I see a whole bunch of parameters, what I've just showed you, that can be changed. For example, the connection string to my database, the database name, the end year, if it is in development, yes or no, the start year. And here you see also directly the advantage of using the descriptions, because I use the descriptions for the connection string with all the possible values. And I actually maybe abuse the description a little bit, because now I can just copy paste it, or I cannot even copy paste it, but at least I know what values can be entered, because a connection string is not something really easy to change. Of course, if you change one, for example, let's set it in development to true. So now it will start leveraging the number of items to keep, so the number of rows I want to keep. I also created a parameter for that, which is 5, but let's change it to 10. One thing you should be aware of is do not forget to click apply. Another thing to be aware of is to start refreshing your data set after you changed it, because it will not be directly leveraged in your data set. You really need to refresh it first if you use import mode. As you can see, I forgot to authenticate, so give me a second. I will enter the credentials and show you how it works. It is connecting to P. Of course, the most interesting usernames and passwords. It failed, probably because of the IP security. Okay, I assume you believe me that this is going to work. IP firewall is enabled on this database, so it will not authenticate. But it doesn't really matter for now. So after clicking apply, do not forget to click the refresh. You can do that here, or you can directly do that in. You can directly trigger them once you've published it. So that's changing the parameters in the Power BI server. So I really advise you to start leveraging the description fields, even if they are not really useful to you, but at least add some one sentence on where is this parameter used for, and maybe if it is a connection string or something more complex, also leverage the description fields to enter all the possible values that you might use, because here I use them, but in this case, the lower 5, I didn't use them. So it can be really useful. The Power BI REST API is also something that can be used to change parameters. Power BI has a really rich REST API that allows you, if you have sufficient privileges to the data set, because you need to be owner of the data set before this is going to work. But this allows you to update the parameters in your data set. So let's quickly, if this bar is going out of the way. Here it is. This is the one. In here, we can just do a post API to the Power BI API, insert the dataset ID, and then default parameters. It's the default part of this API. And as the next part, we also need to insert in the body of this API the name of the parameter, the current value, or the value we want to enter. And in this case, they changed 2 of them, so the database name and the max ID. Of course, parameters or APIs are a really technical developer thing. So are you going to use this as a self-service Power BI user or self-service data analyst? No, I don't think so. But still, it can be really useful because there are a lot of different things where you can start using these APIs, or maybe you are already using them without even knowing it. The same for the usage of PowerShell. PowerShell also allows you to change parameters in Power BI. So again, all code-based, probably not something you're going to use. But for example, in Azure DevOps, you might be already using them. So let me show you an example of how we use parameters inside our deployment pipelines for Azure DevOps. So let me quickly show you. This is what we are executing in a second, a piece of PowerShell code, but by just clicking a few buttons. In here we have Azure DevOps, and Azure DevOps is a versioning tool and release management tool that you can use to publish content. And this content and these Power BI tasks that you can see here are available online as well, and you can find them on my blog later. After this session, I will share the link as well. So you can start reusing them. But this will really help me to set something up quickly, and let's show you what we're actually going to do. So we're going to kick off our release, and this release will help us in setting up workspaces, but also publishing one Power BI file to different environments. In this case, our DTAP, so development, acceptance, and production. So we skipped the test one in this case. But we also want to change the parameter value on the back. So what we're going to do, we have development, acceptance, and production, and this is the data mines demo. So we're first going to create automatically the workspaces and then publish our content to it. So let's go back to releases and just create a release. And yes, this is the data mines demo. So let's create, and now this starts running. And on the back, this is using the PowerShell code to talk to Power BI actually in combination with some Power BI REST APIs. So while we open this, we can see that this is queued now, so it will start spinning in a second and generate everything for us. Why is this useful? Actually, what we're going to do in this case is start connecting in development to our analysis services in the development environment. Once we move to production, it will start leveraging the acceptance analysis services. And when we move to production, it will start using the production analysis services. So there we go, it's executing the group task. So actually it's creating the workspace right now for us. And now it's publishing the report. And assuming that we've built our Power BI file based on development data, which you will see now, and now it's done, is that it executed 5 tasks. So let's have a very quick look at the Power BI workspaces we have at this moment. And we created a workspace based on this, and that is data mines something. There we go, data mines dev. We published this file, and let's open a report. And what we will see here is that we have a report, but it is actually more or less empty. It's a development data set, there's nothing in here. It's connected to the, oh, sorry, this was still the Dutch version first, so it is environment development. So let's hit the approve button here. Yes, we really want to do this. Click approve, and now it's queued to deploy the same for our acceptance environment, but there's one additional task we're going to execute. So let me show you what we're actually going to do, and I will show you that in the previous release, where I need to edit the release first before I can show you actually. In this way, this one we can do that. and its release. And if we look at added task, we have one additional task here, which is update data source. And here it will start updating the current connection to the new connection. And that is what we're actually doing. And in here, I hard coded it. But of course, we can start leveraging this information from a different source or from a lookup list, whatever we prefer. While this is running, it should be almost finished, I guess. Let's have a quick look. It is still running. It's busy with the last task. So let's start refreshing the Power BI service already. And a quick look if we have a second workspace right now. And we already have one, the Data Mines Acceptance Workspace. The Data Mines Acceptance Workspace has the same content, the same report, but let's have a look where this connection is going to. We actually have some data here. And next to that, we have some data. Let's have a quick look at the metadata where we are connected to acceptance right now. So actually it's using these PowerShell and Power BI API functionality to change the parameters on the back of our Power BI file. And it's doing it after publishing. So the tasks executed by DevOps are actually just publishing the same file as we had on development, and after publishing, calling the Power BI API to adjust the parameter value and triggering the refresh. All that is happening on the back. So maybe as a report user, you are already using Power BI API or the PowerShell Cmdlets without even knowing it. Same thing will happen for production, so I'm not going to waste your time with repeating the same steps. Creating templates, something else that can be really, where parameter values can be really useful. So why should you care about templates? Templates can be really easily used to, for example, start reusing your corporate identity in one team file, make support easier because you actually know what the starting point is for all your end users, and it's really like a Kickstarter for new projects. What I showed you earlier, creating a data dimension can be leveraged and can be inserted in your Power BI template file. That makes it easier to directly have your data dimension ready without repeating those steps. So let's create your own template. So I prepared a file for this as well. And where is it? Generate template. So I inserted some template here. I created a logo on top, put in a background, and we have our data dimension. So our data dimension is set up in exactly the same way. I will show you directly in the query editor what we have here. So here we have the start year, the end year, and the date dimension generated with a whole lot of columns. Since it has two inserted parameters, let's have a quick look on how these set up. And we also inserted the description here. So this is really important to remember. Once we just do, or first just close the query editor, once we do save as, or we do export, we can export it as a Power BI template. So let's do that, and we can give it a template description, and we say kickstart new projects. And let's just put it, not in a dashboard in a day, but here we have a folder for this session. And let's just override the existing, why not? Let's take a risk. So let's just close this file and see what happens when we open. No, we don't want, yeah, why not? Let's see what happens when we open this file. I'm quickly going to show you what this looks like. In the folder, we have now a PBIT file, and next to the PBIX. The PBIT is a template file. So let's open the PBIT file. And once this will show up in a second, Power BI will start asking me to fill in the parameter values that we created. So by default, this PBIT file doesn't contain any data until we fill the parameter values, and then it will start generating the data set for us. So once this will show up, we will see the description for a template, and we see again why descriptions for the parameter values are useful. This template file can be shared with your colleagues on a central SharePoint site or wherever you prefer to really kickstart their experience in Power BI. So in here we see the description of the template, kickstart new projects. And on the little information icon here, when I hover over, I can see the description that we added for the parameter value. So enter the first year to start your data mention. So in here we enter 2015 and my end year will be 2020. You may think, where is the background? Because that it looks like it's gone, but as soon as I click load or edit, it will show up. So now I click just edit, and there we go. Now we have the background, and I click edit. That will directly open the query editor for me, so I can show you what's happening here. It generated this whole Power Query script based on the inputted, or it ran this whole Power Query script based on the inserted parameter values, which is the start here and the end here. So this can be really useful to kickstart your new experiences in Power BI, start leveraging the same data dimension across your organization, make sure that your corporate identity is applied across different reports by just leveraging the same information or sharing the same setup with all your colleagues. Another thing that's available is Whatif parameters. Whatif parameters is a different type of parameter that can be used in Power BI Desktop. A Whatif parameter is actually something that is in the reporting front end. So if you look here, we have a different data set with a price, or actually it's the same data set with a price that we paid for the fuel. And we have a Whatif parameter which we can adjust in Power BI Desktop in the front end. For example, say that we are going to add up 10% on the price. Then we can see what is the price after the price increase. So let me show you that in another demo as well. And where is the Whatif parameter demo? Here it is. So we have a line chart. That's the easiest one where you can see it, where we have all the different years. And I started leveraging the two different calculations. One is the paid price, so the actual number, and the price after the increase. This slider bar is actually my Whatif parameter. The Whatif parameter is generated in a few clicks. In the top ribbon here, we can click insert, and I always need to look where it is. I think that, oh, here it is. It is in modeling, sorry. In the top ribbon, you can go to modeling, and we can say new parameter. And the window that will show up is allowing me to set up a Whatif parameter. So demo data mines. And it is a whole number, decimal number, or fixed decimal number. Let's just go for a whole number. The minimum value is 0, and the maximum is, let's say, 100, and it increments by 1. The default value is also 0. So let's add the slicer to this page. And what we will see now is that the Whatif parameter is inserted. And actually, I'm going to copy this to a new page so I can show you how it looked like from scratch. And when I'm moving the slider, you'll see the value changing. What it's doing, what it did on the back, is generating a DAX calculated table. And this DAX calculated table actually looks like this. This is the name of the parameter, generate series from 0 to 100 with increments of 1. It generated a column, and this column contains all these different values. So let's show you in the table setup all the different values that exist in its range, so 0 to 100. And it contains by default a measure. And this measure is actually the selected value from the column that we just created. And if there's no selected value, return me 0, because it was our default value. So let's go back to the report. Now we have this. Let's also add this measure here, so you can actually see what is the selected value. So 20, when I adjust this, it will move with it as well. So this will help us to, for example, use this value that we just selected as a percentage price increase or something different. And that's what I did here. In here, I have a calculation what I leveraged in the field transaction table, and I had a price after increase. And it's a little bit more complex DAX, but it's not really complex to be honest. But I used a variable in here where I divide the percentage difference, which is a whole number, by 100, and I add up 1. Simply because this will, for example, 10% will now be 0.1, and then I add up 1. So I have 1.1. Then I use the sum of the paid price, and I multiply it by the result of this variable, which allows me to easily calculate the price difference for each day. Hovering over will tell me the paid price was 30,400. After the price increase of 10%, it will be 33,400. Changing this will differentiate the line. I can even use negative numbers in here, but let's say we're going to double the price. And we directly see what is the separation between those two lines. I also leveraged it in a bar chart here, in a column chart or a stack bar chart. All is possible to directly show you what is the difference. If you really want to calculate only the difference, you can also, of course, index, use both calculated values and do one minus the other. This is a Whatif parameter. This only exists in the reporting interface on the canvas. So this doesn't create anything in the query editor. As you can see here, there's nothing in here that relates back to the Whatif parameter. So the Whatif parameter is actually something that only is run by DEX, by the usage of DEX. And DEX, creating a DEX table with one column with the range of values and a measure that shows you the selected value. So that's a lot of different things about parameters. Let's do a short recap of what I've showed you. Parameters will really make it easier to move through your DTAP pipeline from development to acceptance to production. You can do this by changing your connection string, or maybe changing the folder path if you connect to flat files stored wherever they are, and makes it easier to also help you in your development. So it will improve your development performance and your development experience by loading smaller data sets in Power BI Desktop, and after publishing, you will start loading the full data set. Imagine that you can start doing this by just publishing the data set, go home, have dinner, and next morning you arrive at the office, the full data set is loaded. Parameters are still changeable after publishing, so you can change them in the Power BI service, but be aware of a useful description will really help you, and that you can select the correct data type. If you didn't select the correct data type, or select data type any, which works in Power BI Desktop, but any doesn't work in Power BI service. Parameters can also be used in a useful way for creating your templates. For example, by generating data dimensions, or maybe already pre-create a data source connection parameter for them. So this can be useful for applying to be applied in PBIT files and start leveraging the same kind of data dimension across your whole organization. And if you start using it with Whatif parameters, it will add some extra flexibility for exploratory reporting and do some changes by adding up percentages or adding up values to your fact table data. With that, I want to reach out to Benny and see if there are any questions at this moment.
Well, Mark, there are a few.
Sure.
I've made sure that there's a bunch of them queued up, but I've also put in the chat that they can start asking questions again if they've got any burning questions. But the ones that we do have are quite good, actually. Because when you were showing the parameters for the different production settings, the development, expectation, and production before heading into Azure DevOps.
Yep.
So Christoph or Histo was commenting that it's all great for DTAP purposes, but how would you go about versioning those PBIX files? And he said himself that it would depend, I guess, but how would you go about it?
So without using Azure DevOps?
Yeah, because we hadn't reached Azure DevOps by then.
Okay. Versioning of your Power BI files, yeah, depending on your organization and if you work in a team or not, I advise you to use SharePoint or OneDrive. At least that's what I'm doing for the smaller setup projects, because that will both SharePoint and OneDrive have versioning by default. So if you mess up your Power BI file, for example, today, I can still go back to the version of yesterday. Sometimes I even see people creating multiple versions of the PBIX files with version 1, version 1.1, version 1.2.
Yep.
To be really honest, I think that's a little bit messy. So
I agree.
I prefer myself use OneDrive or SharePoint, or if I have the chance to do it, I start using Azure DevOps.
Okay, good. So there are a few more questions. This was actually one that I had myself. As you know, I like breaking things, and I wondered how robust the in-development parameter is. You set it to true or false, but will it also accept 0, 1 values, yes, no values, or whatever other alternatives for true or false that I can try and put into it?
You cannot really put it in. So let me go back to the Power BI service where I can show you. And this is everything to do with the setup of your, the type of your parameter. So if I go to the Power BI service and go to the settings here, and let's try to adjust the parameter value for the true or false. If I just type yes here, then it directly results in an error message. Please enter a logical value.
So yeah, it's robust. Okay.
Yeah, that's why I always prefer to use true or false.
Yeah.
Because then I can leverage the default functionality of the parameter settings in Power BI.
Okay, so the next question that we had from MS actually fits into this really well. He wanted to know if a user can change parameters from in the service as well. And what you're seeing, what you're showing right now is that one as well. But what I wondered is that would we be able to build in something, let's say, in a report that they can switch over parameters for themselves in a report? Or nope. Okay.
This is only changeable by the owner of the data set. If you're also admin of this workspace, you first need to do a takeover of the data set before you can change them. Yeah. And the same thing is applicable to the API and PowerShell Cmdlets to change the parameters as well. You need to be an owner of the data set.
An owner of the data set, okay. And if you, let's say if you wanted to shield off the data set completely, you'd split report and data source and make sure that they're in locations where an end user cannot take over the data set.
Yep. Okay. Or make sure that you handle the privileges correctly and you only put it on the doesn't have.
Yeah.
But that's a different discussion.
Yep. It's way different discussion. So 2 more before I saw another one. And then we've got a question from Robin Amel. He wants to know that, is there any way possible that we can prevent overriding a parameter value if we're publishing from our PBIX file?
Not yet. That's the best answer is it depends. Maybe you've seen announcements about XML endpoints, and that is a premium feature actually. But this will allow you to incrementally deploy content to Power BI. What I advise you to do if you want to know more about this is have a look at ALM Toolkit for Power BI. I think the website is just almtoolkit.com, but
yeah, I'll look it up and put it into chat.
But ALM Toolkit has already great examples about metadata deployment of Power BI, what will be available later this year, actually. And metadata deployment you can define if you want to override the parameter value, yes or no. In other words, what part of the metadata of your Power BI file you're going to deploy. Okay, good. But currently you're overriding your data set as a whole, so also the parameter values.
Yeah, that's what I figured. So then MS also wanted to know that you're working with a SQL-based data source. Yep. Are you working that on an import or a direct query mode?
Works in both scenarios. Yep. Actually, I've opened this file before the session and everything was set to direct query. But actually, one of my best practices is import unless. So I changed all the connections to import before the session.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah,
good.
But to be honest, it works in both scenarios, direct query and import.
But because it works doesn't mean we should.
Yep.
Okay, good. So that was the question that were queued up. I saw one more coming up in the chat, and then other than that, I don't think there's any more questions. Okay. So Edgeir wants to know if there's a reason to configure the date dimension in Power Query over DAX.
Yes, there is a reason, but I'm always a bit confused here as well. Personally, what I find really annoying is every time I open the data view in Power BI. So let's see, where is my Whatif demo, because then I can show you it. Here. Actually, what happens here, and this is not a really big DAX statement, but if I open the data view here in Power BI Desktop, and every time I click the table, which is my calculated table, that's the same what you're doing if you're creating your data dimension in DAX. Every time it will expand the whole DAX formula window here. And personally, I think that's really annoying. But that's one of the reasons. Another reason, which is I think way more valuable, if you do it in Power Query, it is completely run by the Vertipaq engine and really good compressed. That doesn't mean that DAX tables are not compressed, but they're less good compressed than what you create in Power Query. That's what I know per my understanding, but what the actual difference is in terms of how much bigger or smaller is it if you do it in DAX or Power Query, I'm not sure about it.
Yeah, I would have been mad if you wouldn't have given that answer. For smaller date tables, the difference is not that big. But if you're going to look at, like, let's say 5 or more years, then there's definitely some difference that comes up.
You have a session about improving performance, so
yeah, I know. That's one of the things that I work around. So in general, just try to flip it as far up as front in the flow as you can. If it's data warehouse, good. If it's Power Query, okay. If it's something else, just try to put it as early on in the process as we can. Yeah. So one more question. What we've seen now is all about Power BI service. Which of these parameterizations will also work in Power BI report server?
Oh, difficult question, because to be really honest, I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I feared as well, because I didn't know.
I've only worked with report server once, and it was not for a very long time. So yeah, sorry, I don't know. I'm happy to answer that question later. If somebody can drop that question in my mail, then I'm happy to look after it.
Yeah, just make sure that you put up your contact info again, and then how they can find you. And then to close off, one last question. People love the fact that you're the president of the Pie Chart fan club, and they want to know when and where you guys meet.
The Pie Chart fan club, yeah, of course. I think you're referring to the LinkedIn group as well, or?
Well, yeah. There's
a LinkedIn group, Data Professionals Against Pie Charts. I think it's actually a closed group, so let me look if we can open that. If you really want to be part of that LinkedIn group and see all the bad examples why you should avoid pie charts in every scenario, also drop me a message on LinkedIn. I'm happy to add you to that group.
Good. Okay, so that was all the questions, and we're actually right on the time that we should be finishing. So the timing is excellent on this.